So it's a Western Queensland Primary Health Network project that's they're funding it, and basically Catholic Care's implementing it.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Well, we might get started because Kat's got lots to run through. For those of you who don't know me, which I think is just you, Brian, we haven't met. I'm Trudy from Regional Development Australia. So us in combination with the councils fund this tool, ID Profile, and Kat is our representative from ID Profile, who is on a crazy 4-day, 8 location, 13 presentation road trip.
I think the most spoken time a long time ago.
Oh, okay, good. All right, excellent. So, so RDA, obviously, we support our local governments to progress projects. Hey, Ethan, how are you? Have a seat. Yeah, to progress projects, get more grants to the region, and also get on the ground to feedback to the federal government. So part of that progressing projects and getting more grants to the region, we see this tool as crucial. This gives you the data and the economic impact tools to actually support up a good project with numbers. Like in a competitive grant round, you need to have your facts and figures together to say why you should get that money. So this is our competitive advantage over some of the other regions. And we're really lucky that Kat, as opposed to some of the other representatives, when it comes to our region, she's like, True, you got me for 4 days working as hard as you want, and take me wherever, we'll just knock it all over in a few days. So the good thing too is she's quite accessible. If you want another session via Zoom, easy to do. Now today's session you will get the recording from. So we've got Trish online and the 3 of you in the room, and then a couple of registrations that have obviously dropped away for whatever reason. But any of the people who registered and yourselves that are attending will get a recording so you can come back to it. If there's anything that you see in there or you're trying to find at a later date and you can't find it, you can always just shoot an email through to myself or Tim. So you've all got Tim's email, the admin at RDA email that you've gotten all the registrations and stuff from. You can email Tim, and if he can't find the answer for you, then we get in touch with Kat and she finds the answer for us. So, you know, just keep those doors open, those lines of communication open. Keep touching base with us, okay? I'm going to hand over to Kat. She's going to run you through the tool live. So the way to usually find it is I just Google ID Profile Darling Downs, but you'll see at the top there it's a live website link. So 90% of what Kat's going to show you through today is all publicly available. You guys have got full access to this. There's a couple of economic tools that we'll run through at the end of today's session that you do need a password to get into. Shelley here at your council has that password and can do those reports, and we do them for you. So if you ever want that report, you go, Trudy, I remember this report, you know, can you send it through to me? We're now looking at constructing a community hall. We've now got a identity program we're going to do, and it's going to be this much invested. What's the economic impact to that? And we can punch that in and email the report to you.
We won't be allowed access. The organisation won't be allowed the password.
Yeah, so what we have done in the past is just you need a little bit more training. So if you get a little bit more training, we pass that over. So like DAP is a good example. Department of Ag, they had these RED grants, Regional Economic Development grants, and they were punching out loads of them. And some of the businesses that they were helping with these grants, the numbers were changing right down to close to the submit time. And so I just said, look guys, I will just teach you how to use the tool, and that way you don't have to be coming to us and going back, you can just get it. So if it's something that you think you may want to have some more access to, happy to do another session with you, or you might not feel fine after this, depends if we've got time, but happy to do another session with you and give you access to it. The only reason we don't is we have had people in the past go almost attach totally the wrong report to their grant application, and it would have hurt their grant application, and we don't want to see that happen. And then Kat will talk through today, it's not just about the report in itself, it's also about how you interpret it. So some more conversation around how to interpret it would probably be valuable for you to be using it. Yeah, but more than happy to. We've got a grant organisation in the region that she does a ton of work for some of the councils and a ton of work for so many organisations. We just said, look, as long as you never charge for the, but she charges for her grant services, you can't charge for that report because we already fund it, so it's available. As long as you don't actually charge for the reports, more than happy for you to just get in there and do your stuff without having to come through us.
Oh,
Yeah, so Ethan, yeah, we can talk offline
Mm.
further. All right, I'm gonna hand to Kat, let me
Great.
get caught up on it.
So the way that it works, guys, is RDA Darling Downs and Southwest, all of the councils there have subscribed to this tool. And as part of that package, you get access to what we call a community profile and an economic profile. The community profile is all of that evidence base about your community. So it's what the federal or state government are going to use to assess Paru Shire or Merway or whatever, or wherever it might be. So when you come on here and you're looking at this and you're looking for a particular area or you're looking for certain statistics, you can come here and drop down that for any of those council areas. So if you're not just working in Paru and you're doing Merway and places like that, Maranoa, you're able to drop down and actually drill down into those council areas to be quite specific about those geographies. So the first thing that I will say is almost every page on here is actually exportable. So you can export it, put it into a Word document and attach it to any grant applications that you have as well, or communication with the with your community or that sort of thing. And when you come down here, you get basically a menu of items of what is exactly in this the community profile. So you can see here, you can look at things like volunteering if you want to talk about you know, the way your age demographic is changing or the need for assistance in your community. You can come down here and have a look and click straight on that data and be taken straight to that area. The first page I'm going to show you is the population highlights page. And the reason I take people here is simply because it just gives me a really good overview of exactly what your community looks like across lots of different data sets. So if I come on here, I can see my area and I can come down to Paru Shire. Okay, and straight away we see 1,554 people, declined by 8 from the previous year, and there's been steady population decline over time in your shire. When we look here, we can see the median age is older than the rest of Queensland. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population is much higher. So when you're starting to think about those arguments that you need to use as part of getting a grant, and you want to showcase that compared to the rest of Queensland, the rest of Australia, we have a much higher proportion of Indigenous people in our community, or we have a much older age demographic. These are the sorts of stats you need to use. This is the sort of evidence base that you need, because this is what they will be comparing to in their offices in Canberra and Brisbane. Lone person households much higher. Things like median weekly rent is much lower. So when we're talking about livability and things like this, renting is below the state average as well. Households with the mortgage is below. So we can come down and we can see all of these different variables that are going to help us to back us up in terms of being able to get a grant and sell that story. Because when you're looking at grants or you're looking even at providing information for your community, it's all about the story, you know, and the story of your place. And this is where you find that in the statistics. I'm going to take you through a few places here where it's going to be important for you guys to go, particularly after the next census. So we just all did the last census. Hopefully everyone's filled that out, and that information gets fed through the ABS. And what will happen is in 6 to 12 months' time, we will have a full set of new data, which will represent your community for the next 5 years. So it's normally we will get the first data drop in between March and July of next year, and so on. But at the moment, this is the most up-to-date community data that you can get. So when we come down here, we have a look straight away. It says derived from the census question, what is the person's date of birth? So it tells you where it comes from. And as I mentioned before, you can export this entire page into Word or PDF and just attach it to a document. When you come down here, we can see Paru Shire compared to RDA Darling Downs. Now, if you are going for a grant application with the state or federal government, you need to change that benchmark area to reflect the area that you're going for the grant. So I want to show what Paru Shire looks like compared to Queensland. And now I don't really live in the data tables. You get all of that data there. Where I like to live is in the charts. So straight away, I can see here compared to Queensland, a much older demographic in these areas, which makes me think about things like hospital services, you know, healthcare, you know, a whole range of different areas that straight away sort of loneliness issues, because we saw those lone person households, ageing in place? What sort of housing are we offering these people to be able to stay in community, those sorts of things. And we can see we have some real challenges in this working population. And I'm assuming, do you guys have a high school here?
Yeah.
You do have a high school? Yeah, because I mean, I sort of look at this and go, okay, what's happening in terms of the high school? People sort of get to that sort of 9 and then they start to drop away 10 to 14 in those upper primary high school. So thinking about, you know, what's happening at the high school, or how can we keep those people in community for longer as well, kids dropping out. And we can see this is where we're changing over time. So this is important as well, because not only are we dominant in these older age demographics, but we're also changing at the older end. That's where we're increasing our population. So it's really thinking about what that means for the community in terms of infrastructure and you know, project delivery and things like that. Also, this is a concern, obviously, simply because we can see population decline across all age groups. Okay, when we come down here, you can see dominant and emerging groups. You get this analysis, you can use that in all your report writing. Okay, so if you're going for a grant, you can use that in your grant writing as well. Any of that information, it just gives you basically a summary of what's above. Okay, so that's our age structure. That's one of the first things I think that people should really be aware of. And when the next census comes out, really looking at that and thinking, okay, what does our community look like? What does our age demographic look like? Birthplace is another good one. In which country was the person born? It talks to us about our cultural identity in our communities. And very, very few. When we look here, United Kingdom, New Zealand, 14 and 13. Okay, so here's our birthplace. So majority of those 1,500 people are local or Australians as well. And you can also, so we've had a decline in our overseas. And when you look at this compared to Queensland, like one of the things I'd be sort of looking at here is, you know, is there an opportunity for us to attract some of those people to our region? Because Queensland does attract a lot of Kiwis and British people into our communities, and mainly to that eastern seaboard, but it certainly is an opportunity to look at how we get people into the community, even if it's for between 1 and 5 years. So we also talk about language spoken at home, and we can look here at our Indigenous languages, which is important, particularly when there are some. Okay, so not all elements could be displayed due to insufficient data in Paru. So that's one of the challenges that you guys have, being a small population. I worked for a long time in Cook Shire, and we had lots of challenges around data, particularly around our Indigenous community. But certainly we can look at drilling down into some of those things. If, for example, there's funding around.
Sorry, for some of our smaller councils out this way, we have separately funded a portal for Southwest.
Yes.
So, you know, because Baloo used to have the same issue. A lot of Baloos is missing. Their total population is 255 people. So really hard to do averages with those sorts of numbers. So you see that.
So what I've done.
Drop down to Southwest red.
Yep.
That's these 6 Southwest shires across our footprint. So Maranoa, Balong, Merway, you guys, Baloo, and Quilpie. Which, if something big's going on out this way anyway, like kind of has, especially with the economic stuff, it has a flow-on effect beyond just Paru, let's face it, to those shires. So having that additional overlay area may help you with some of these things.
Yes. So if we click on there, we can straight away start to fill up our language spoken at home tables. Okay, so when we start to look here, Filipino, Vietnamese, Afrikaans, and when we move down here to see how that's changed, so language spoken at home, mainly Filipino, we can see our change here. Okay, and this is in numbers, so very small numbers.
Yeah.
Okay.
But at least you've got some.
But at least you've got some.
Case together.
Yeah.
Use the Southwest red numbers. So you guys can kind of flip between the two, which is really lucky, you know. And I have done the economic impact reports, and I have done some other things going, all right, let's have a look at that, what that effect is for Joshua Council, but let's have a look at what the Southwest is. And especially for a few of the councils are working together, we'll use the Southwest red data. So you're really lucky to have that additional overlay.
So Southwest red is the 5 surrounding shores.
6. Yeah, 5.
Where does Deadly Choices cover?
Maranoa.
Oh, yeah, so that's what.
Paru,
That's what I'd be
Yeah.
looking at.
Same.
Yeah.
So that
And concert, passion concert.
and Quilby and Baloo were the other, so they're the 6.
Yeah.
So a lot of what you're doing is that footprint anyway.
Yeah.
But the good thing is under the Darling Down Southwest portal, if you want to only have a look at Maranoa, it's there.
Yeah.
If you want to have a look at just Paru, it's there. If you want to have a look at the 6 amalgamated,
Yep.
you can do that. And then for us, sometimes we have a look at the whole RDA
region.
footprint, which is also takes into account Gundy, Darling Down, Western Downs, Southern Downs, and Toowoomba. Now the issue is Toowoomba is 50% of our population for all of Darling Down Southwest. So Toowoomba itself can sometimes really skew our numbers, whereas you guys having that additional Southwest red overlay, those numbers are certainly more indicative of what's going on out here without that eastern skew.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So you
absolutely.
can't actually select just the shires you want, it's either Southwest Red or the individual.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there is another tool, I'm happy to email it to you, Ethan. It doesn't have the layout and it doesn't have economic at all. But Treasury do a tool, the Statistics Office of Treasury, Queensland Government, and there's a Queensland map that comes up and you can randomly pick and then it puts those 3 or those 4 together.
Yeah.
So sometimes for projects like that, I will go in and use Treasury, but it doesn't have all the data that this thing's got. But if you really wanted to show a few together, the Treasury tool is your best. So I'll just make a note that when Tim sends out the recordings, to also just add that's a good link if you want some of that little
Yeah.
tool.
It is good. So the other one I'm going to show you, just because we've been doing a lot of work around qualifications, or, you know, a lot of councils have been doing work around qualifications and skills and training. Now, this is still on the Southwest region. Okay, I'll keep it on there for the minute, and we're comparing to Queensland. Okay, I'm going to move straight down here and we can see much higher proportion of no qualification. So if you're looking at skills and training in the community, this is the sort of information that I'd be showing, is that we have a much higher proportion of people who are unqualified in our community. We can see here, whilst that has reduced between 2011 2016, it is still a much higher proportion than Queensland. Okay, and we've had some slight increases across our qualifications. And once again, guys, you can actually export each of these individual charts and tables. So you just export those into a CSV file, email them to people, or you can export the entire page, which will talk about what all the definitions are and things like that. So you get covered, and you also always get your source down the bottom. Okay, so if anyone asks you where it's come from, you always get that source, and you can actually click on there and it'll take you directly to the source as well. Okay, I'm going to go down now to my job seeker information, because this is a really good one, particularly for councils. Okay, so job seeker talks to me about how many people are accessing the old unemployment benefit or youth allowance. Okay, so here we can see RDA Darling Downs 13,000. There's currently 13,516 people accessing those payments across the table. Okay, and the reason why I like this data is because with the unemployment data, it bounces around, and that's simply because the labour force survey is a sample survey. Okay, so particularly in smaller regions like this, you'll just see your unemployment can just bounce around quite quickly. Whereas this is about numbers across the table. So this is at the Department of, I think it's Department of Social Services. We were never given access to this data until COVID. But you can see here at the moment, compared to March 2020, which is sort of that pre-COVID time period, 12,039 compared to 13,516. So a lot of people are using this in their applications at the moment to basically say, well, look, you know, these are the additional people that we want to get off job seeker to go back to business as usual. So we can see an additional 22 in Paru compared to where you were previously. What I want to show you is how that escalated during the crisis. During the health crisis, when we sort of all went down to lockdown, it was very uncertain. We can see there was an additional 6,121 in the RDA Darling Downs Southwest region that went on to payments at that time. Paru 36, so we're now down to 22, moving in the right direction. So it's just keep being able to track exactly where you are in terms of people accessing those payments. Okay, yeah, so big jump. You can see what impact that had on the communities and payments.
You'll notice Baloo's missing. The money around the list.
Oh,
So to
To
start
do
with, they
that.
had not a single, the only local government area in all Australia with nobody on job seeker. That's
well,
what.
there you
You
go.
know, you can work out there, you work out.
You're out. You're out.
You're out of job, they find you.
Sorry, Kat, I'll stop interrupting.
No, you're right, Dale.
Green
You're right.
tool.
You're right. We've also got area profiles, so you can come on here and you can actually print out a report. Okay, so all of the data that you saw, you know, that I just showed you plus more, you can actually come on here and say, okay, I want my population highlights, I want my 5-year age groups that I showed before, I want to know about ancestry in the community, birthplace, you know, my qualifications, highest level of schooling, all of these items. And then what you can do, and this is for the Southwest region, so if you wanted to change that to just Paru Shire, benchmark against regional Queensland, Queensland or Australia, or the RDA DDSW region. And then when you come down here, you can put your email address in and send yourself the report in PDF or Word. Okay, so you've got that information there ready to be able to provide to your mayor, CEO, things like that if they require that for media purposes, or alternatively for your grants and applications and that sort of thing. So that is your community profile. So guys, you can go through here, you know, you can't break it, use it as you please. And if you run into any questions with that sort of stuff, see, I sort of see that red tool as sort of my backup to my grant applications and the story I have to tell in order to be able to say the reasons why I'm trying to get this grant. The green tool, on the other hand, is your economic profile, and it's all about how your economy is performing, how big your economy is, who's working in your industries, what's happening across those industries as well. So we can see here, this is for Darling Downs DDSW, so we can see local jobs 139,418, but we've only got 128,042 residents, so we're importing people to take up those jobs in our community in that RDA region each day. Largest industry, healthcare, GRP. Come down the bottom, once again we get this menu of items. We can look at unemployment, building approvals, employment by industry. So there's lots of bits of information. Now this tool, where the red tool, most of it gets updated after census. The green tool, the economic profile, gets updated yearly. So in about February, March every year, we get our new data sets that are reflective of the previous financial year. So this data is out to June 2020. So in March of next year, we will really start to see what the real effect of COVID has been on a lot of communities. Okay, so the first place I go to is my economic indicators, because I want to see how our economy has performed in terms of I guess my output or the value of my businesses. And we can see here, we'll go on to the Southwest Red region. And despite COVID, we actually had a little bit of growth during that period. And that's all to do with the industry mix of this region. Let's have a look at Paru. And we can see we had a downfall here. Okay, so it's a lot of the activity that was happening in Maranoa and places like that that has really kept the region alive. Mining has had a huge turnaround, and we can see the difference that has made on the community. But we can see here that change in GRP compared to Queensland. So this is the sort of stuff that you guys can use as part of your advocacy as well, to turn around and say, look, we're concerned about the trajectory that Paru is on. You know, compared to Queensland, we haven't been performing as well, and we really need to think about what we can do in order to encourage growth in the region. So when you look here over the last sort of, you know, 10 or so years, we've only had 2 years of positive growth in Paru. So they're the sorts of sentiments that I would be using as part of the, you know, that reporting back to the state and federal government. The next thing I like to look at is my local employment, because there's how our industries are performing, but then there's also, well, how many people are actually employed in our community and how are we going around that. So you can see that between 19 and 20, we actually had growth in employment. Okay, so if, depending on what story you want to tell, you know, if it's for advocacy and positioning of Paru in terms of we need support, we would be looking at GRP and saying we're concerned about the way our economy is performing. However, in terms of local jobs, this is the real positive story about, well, we are still creating jobs in our community and there is still activity. These jobs, however, are low value jobs, okay, because they're not contributing to your overarching GRP. So it means you might be creating jobs in things like your retail or food or hospitality or things like that don't have a huge flow-on effect into your community. So we can see how that's performed. So we've had, let's have a look. So negative, we've had 2 years, 4 years of positive jobs growth in the last 10 years. Okay, so it's those sorts of stories that get people thinking and get, you know, people to understand what's actually happening in your community as well. So jobs and GRP.
Just on that one, if you plotted above median rainfall on an annual basis, it would nearly match the positives.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, overlay.
And it's all about the industry. It's all about your industry
about
mix.
12-18 month lag, but that's how it
Wow.
works. Yeah.
And here we can see your value of building approval. So this really gives me a good indication of what your forward-looking trajectory might be, particularly because it talks about your construction sector and things like that. And so we can see, you know, all non-residential building approvals, and compared to 17, 18, 18, 90 performing much better. So the last 2 years, so what are those things there? Do you know what they would be? Non-res construction. I know you had your tourism project. Yes.
Library at school.
Yeah. Yeah.
Library at school.
Yeah.
That'll be in that year. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's amazing how, and this takes us back to those grants, how important grants are for communities like this around, you know, school grants, you know, things like disaster management grants or whatever it could be that are going to help to stimulate your building approvals as well.
Yeah, could that be a mistake? Like usually something like that.
Roads.
Like,
Oh,
ideally,
workshop. When it burned down. Is that weird? No?
2009, 2010.
There's a workshop. When did the workshop burn down?
13 million worth of non-res. Roads.
So what's the amount that
There's
hovered over that?
So that there, 13. So when we come down here, we can see.
When you buy a station, like when it is on the big construction.
Oh, no, it's only 3 years, isn't it?
Would that be associated with the 2010 floods? Trish here.
Yes, Trish, it could be. It looks like it's disaster funding. Something
Yeah.
like that.
You've got, so the floods were in March 2010.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, after living in Cookshire, when you see things like that, I tend to find it's something to do with disaster funding.
So like a fire, that fire and some floods or something.
Yeah, and then you just get these high levels of funding, and that's why it's so important during those periods. It's really hard to manage it, but to try and stretch out that funding over a couple of years, because you get that strong growth and then very poor growth after that, you tend to find, which you can see has happened here. So you've had this strong growth here and then very poor growth afterwards. It's taken some time to almost rebuild some capacity in your building approvals. So that's another good one to look at. So gross product, local employment and building approvals. We also now have these quarterly economic indicators because people are looking for data very quickly at the moment to try and, I guess, you know, showcase how their economy is performing. We can see here in Paru, this is your COVID quarter. And when we come down here, we can actually see that it was the quarter before and this would be drought related as well, certainly was a harder hit quarter than the actual COVID quarter, because you guys weren't as exposed to COVID as other shires. Most shires, nearly every shire that I've been to has the COVID quarter is much a much more negative quarter than majority of others. So we can see here, it's really been, a lot of this has been drought related. And we can see, compared to Queensland, had a higher fall in GRP during that period, despite not being a tourist destination. What we'll look at now is our local jobs, because we saw there was some improvement. We can see our jobs fallout was only 2012 during this period, and then 20 during this period, but not as high as Queensland. Okay, so yeah, so your GRP has fallen harder than Queensland, but your local jobs have stayed afloat, considering you've got those big job losses in those eastern seaboard communities, particularly the tourist locations as well. So that September data will be updated shortly, and that'll give you your next iteration of the impact of COVID on your community as well. The next thing we're going to look at is our local employment, and this breaks it down by industry. Okay, so we can see in Paru, ag, forestry and fishing, largest employer. When we come down here, we've got Paru Shire versus Queensland. I always change my benchmark year to the previous year because I want to see what's happened over that 1 year period. But sometimes, you know, you might want to use it at a, you know, if the floods happened in 2010-11, you might want to show how slowly an industry has recovered or that sort of thing. So you can select a different comparison year. But here we can see over that previous year, we actually added 154 jobs in our agricultural sector. Okay, so that's up to June 2020. Mining, we lost 17. So we pretty much lost in almost every other industry across the board. So when we come down here, we can see ag, forestry, fishing, very, very strong. And then we lost jobs pretty much across the board in all other sectors, but we gained jobs in our agriculture. Now, part of that, because of the drought, can mean that we are adding jobs and we're working harder for less because of the drought. So you'll tend to find when a drought is here, we'll see our GRP drop in an industry, but we'll see employment increase, and that can mean that just there's you know, either more people working for less money as you're trying to get more out of less, essentially. Does that make sense? Yeah. It can also mean that when we look at FTE, we're talking about, you know, let's say 37, 38 hours a week. It can also mean that someone is working 80 hours a week, and it's okay, so that's really interesting. The other thing that we can do is we can look at our industry sector analysis, and let's look at your ag sector. So we can come down here and we've got Paru Shire. This is for all industries, but I can actually select a specific industry. And if I want to just look at ag, it's going to give me all different bits of information on ag. So it gives us my employment total. So there's 323 people working there are working the equivalent of 2 full-time jobs. Okay, so they're working extremely hard. When we have a look here, output total sales, value add, our exports, domestic versus international exports, our imports into that sector. So it gives us all of these different bits of information. So we have a much higher worker productivity out here compared to Queensland. So there's different bits of information you can use here, guys. Economic output by and then we can see our local sales 10%, and then we've got our international exports at the end as well. So it just talks to you about what's happening in that industry. Okay, I'm just going to come up here, and we've also got this time series information, so we can see what's happened in your agricultural sector over time. Let's have a look in terms of employment. And we can see here it's been very steady, and then we've had this very big increase in employment between 19 and 2020. Okay. So have you guys found that in the community? You've felt that there's been increased employment or more people in the community or that sort of thing? Not really?
Malls and all that agriculture.
Yeah, no. And it's hard to look at
Not that many.
data
No.
without the detail behind it, like to tell the story, because it's like, I haven't recognized that kind of.
Yes.
Haven't recognised anyone new. So,
yeah.
It's Cunnamulla, everyone knows everyone.
Does it show in that drop down, like where,
Which
in
in
the
like
ag
which
breakdown?
part of ag? So if you come on here, I can have a look here. It'll just
Yeah, with a comment.
yes.
Yeah, I know we were getting volunteers and backpackers and lots of people were employing backpackers, and then they changed the rules and they couldn't come and work for you as volunteers. So that would have some impact because
Okay.
we then had to put them on
So you
board
have to put them on
wages,
the
so
books
change
then.
structure. Yeah,
That would
yeah.
make a difference.
And I assume that would be making a bit of difference.
Yes, it would. Absolutely, because it's about the recognition of the employment. So Trish was just saying that backpackers traditionally could come out and volunteer, and so they wouldn't be on the books, and then they changed the legislation to say they need to put them on the books. So she said that could be part of the jump, is you've got those workers, but you now actually need to put them.
Maybe some of the cluster fencing that's
Yes.
happened, that's probably,
Yeah.
probably a large chunk of that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because
And
there's
it's
something.
there aren't the backpackers around, obviously, and certainly the number of backpackers in Australia now, most of them don't really want to come to the West when they can get a job on the coast. And
Yeah.
so we're having to try and find other employees from anywhere and everywhere, actually.
So would that have been apparent between 2019 and 2020?
Yeah, I think they changed the legislation in there somewhere. I'm not sure exactly. I can't remember exactly when, but it would have had an impact. That change of legislation would have had an impact because we were paying our backpackers cash probably, or and all of a sudden we had to pay them award wages for them to claim the 88 days.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that cost is FTE.
Yeah, they're full-time equivalent,